Welcome into the Football Guys DFS show. We are here. Andy Dalton and Juwan Jennings won people a lot of money last week, and so we're here to find you maybe the next Andy Dalton and Juwan Jennings, or maybe it is Andy Dalton and Juwan Jennings over again. But it's myself, Jeff Bell, and I'm joined with our DFS captain, Devin Knotts, and with Phil Alexander as well, the highest soaring New York Jets fan, now that Aaron Rodgers looks like Aaron Rodgers himself. But we are going to walk through both of the cash and GPP lineup plays on DraftKings and on FanDuel. But Devin, why don't you fire it off here? And I don't know if last week, I know we did a giveaway, but I think we came up a little bit short on our giveaway.
Yeah, you guys disappointed me there. I'm blaming the chat for this one because we gave you a very reasonable goal. It was less than the week one likes. You guys came up short. I think we had 225 and we're at like 170, 180 again. We'll do another one, but you got to get to 200. I'll lower it a little bit. I'll make it a little bit easier, but you still got to give us that like and subscribe. We're giving away jerseys, guys. We're not giving away cheap prizes. We're not giving away Taysom Hill helmets anymore. We're stepping our game up. You gotta give us a little bit. It costs nothing to hit that button. And again, any team, any size, any player. Our first guy is in the UK that won, and we're figuring out how to ship something international. So anybody who wins, we will figure out a way to get you a jersey, even if I have to buy it and FedEx it myself. So give us a like. What player? Jeff, give us a player. What player do you want to do this week?
Caleb Williams.
Caleb Williams. How many DraftKings points Caleb Williams will have? Closest to it wins a jersey. I'm sorry to the person who won last week, but the rules are the rules. Sorry.
And I think somebody nailed it right on last week. They did a great job last week on. I think we had.
If I nailed it right on, I would have made like 70 accounts just to keep clicking that like. So just saying, if you win next week, you can make sure that the likes hit there. But let's get into the show, guys.
Yeah, so Phil, fire it off here. We always start with the games that we're targeting this week, and I know I have a couple on the slate that I'm looking at, but kind of where is your eye line for this week 4 matchup?
Yeah, there's 4 games that I think are pretty clear to target. The first one, I think coming into the year, we might have been a little bit surprised that this would probably be the premier game of week 4, but Commanders at Cardinals has a 50-point over-under. We just saw Jaden Daniels go nuts on Monday Night Football. Both teams have super forgiving defenses, quarterbacks that could run around, so that should be a fun one. The other team in that Monday night game was the Bengals, whose offense looked really good against a weak Commanders defense. They face the Panthers on the road this week, who have an equally bad defense, or maybe a slightly better than equally bad defense. That's got a 47-point total. I would say that's probably the second most appealing game. It definitely dips from there. There's a lot of low-scoring games on this slate, but I would say Eagles at Bucks is a little bit interesting. 44-point total, some injuries in that game that we have to monitor and talk about. Jaguars at Texans, another decent one. And maybe Vikings at Packers with a 43.5-point total is the last one I'll throw out there as a somewhat interesting, but I think the first 4 really stand out.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned occasionally talking about playing sides instead of games. I think you've hit those games right on there. I think there's some good sides matchups here because I have the Chiefs, the 49ers, and the Steelers all kind of seem like in potential good spots to put up some points there. Devin, what did we miss? Is there anything else that's kind of drawing your eye this week?
Nope.
The one that I was a little bit surprised on Vegas being the number being a little bit lower than what I would expect would be the Saints and Falcons. We obviously saw those first 2 weeks how explosive the Saints offense was. Obviously last week, not so much. Eric McCoy, the center for the Saints, is injured. So that maybe that's a factor in it, or maybe it's just the Falcons really haven't taken off offensively, but that was at about 42 points. And so I was a little bit surprised that total relative to the other ones. But I think Cardinals, Commanders right there, Phil. And let's go into our cash games and on quarterbacks. And we talked a little bit pre-show. We're going to keep it a little bit tighter on our cash plays this week to kind of give you a better idea and feel more comfortable there. But Devin, why don't you start us off with how you're building out your quarterback lineups for cash games?
Yeah, I mean, quarterback's the position this week that I'm probably filling out last. And it's sort of whether or not I can afford the high end, which I don't think I can. Like, I'd love to have Kyler Murray. I'd love to have, in that extremely advantageous matchup against Washington. My worry there is whether or not he needs to run against this bad secondary. And if he doesn't run, then do I really want like a immobile Kyler Murray at 6,800? I'm going Andy Dalton at 5,300. Revenge game against the Bengals. The Bengals looked, I mean, they are missing, I think they're missing like their entire defensive line. They don't look the same without, Jesse Bates, they lost 2 years ago to the Falcons, and they're running out some corners that are pretty questionable. So I, I think it's an offense, like until Jonathan Brooks comes back, they're not going to be able to run the ball. Like Chuba Hubbard is a worse version of Zach Charbonnet, who just like is a plotter. Might be the worst starting running back in the league. Probably debatable, but Jerome Ford certainly has an argument there. But yeah, I think it's Dalton. I think they're going to have to throw. I think it's a high-scoring game. I think he's in a position where he could get to 300 yards. He's 5,300, and he allows you to build a pretty stacked lineup with some running backs and some wide receivers that I want to target. There's not, like I said, there's not a lot of value this week based on at least Wednesday.
Yeah, that is the one thing we are recording early, so some value could appear there. But Phil, how are you feeling about that one, or what are your plays?
Yeah, I totally agree that there is not a lot of apparent value on the slate that has opened up just yet, but I'm not doing Andy Dalton to my cash game lineup quite yet. It was a great debut, right? First quarterback to
last
throw
2
for 300
games
yards and 3
all
touchdowns.
the guy does in Carolina is throw 300 yards. That's what I'm saying.
He's fair enough, but there's another Carolina Panther, one of his pass catchers that I'm for sure using in cash, and I don't think I could stomach a Carolina stack in my cash game lineup. So I'm going back to Jaden Daniels at 6,500. So while I agree that Dalton looks good, and there's even some other guys that aren't bad looking in that low to mid 5K tier, I think we saw last week that in a good matchup, you can't really pass up Daniels if he's going to stay sub 7K. He's gone for 28 plus DraftKings points in 2 out of 3 now. Last week, that deep passing game opened up, and I feel like Cliff Kingsbury would have to be insane to put that toothpaste back in the tube now that he could see how accurate Daniels is with those deep balls. So just to like illustrate the value here, Devin mentioned Kyler Murray, the quarterback on the other side of that game. He's 6,800, so he's 300 more than Daniels. And in 2 out of his 3 games, he scored 15 DraftKings points, right? Compared to the 28 plus that Daniels has put up in 2 out of 3. So I just think the value is great. I mean, Kyler Murray, I would consider him, but I have the same reservations as Devin. I don't know if he's really going to need to run. I don't know if Washington's defense is as bad as the Rams, which was his only other good game.
It's pretty bad.
I know it is pretty bad, but
league. So like it does worry me that he could. But I don't know. James Conner's there, so like I don't get the sense that maybe he runs for 100 yards. I just don't see it.
So I think a quick note on that one, Austin Eckler is announced out. So he had a concussion and he left the Monday night game. They have said today that he will not be playing in that game. So that might open up some direction as we move into running backs. But I'm curious to hear you guys. I know that obviously Jane Daniels had that great performance on Monday night. How much do you think he's discounted this week because that was on Monday night and not a Sunday game that they're able to adjust to?
Probably $600 to $700.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I think I was going
to say about 500. So right in the same ballpark.
It's kind of where my mind was as
well.
well.
I'd love to get to him. There's just a running back that I want to play, and he's too expensive.
The only other name that I've kind of thought about would be, again, playing sides, and we haven't seen the big production yet, but Justin Fields going up against the Colts defense that's really struggled at just 5,500. That might be another direction there to kind of step into getting one of these mobile quarterbacks. I do believe Jaylen Warren will be out this week because they pulled him last week and they were talking about his preseason injury kind of just wasn't running right. So that might be a direction. And I know Najee Harris got dinged up as well. So that might be an opportunity. We finally see a big explosion for Fields. But we can move into our running backs, and we kind of led into it a little bit with Austin Eckler being out and now having just a Brian Robinson backfield solely in Washington. Would that be a consideration, or just too concerned about doubling up on a maybe still a little bit questionable Commanders offense? Or how are you building out your cash running backs here, Phil?
Yeah, Brian Robinson is one name that I had an eye on. Like Devin, I do want to spend up at least at running back one because I like Robinson as my running back two. So the question for me was, do I do Saquon Barkley at 8K on DraftKings or Breece Hall at 7,800? The optimizers seem to like Hall more, which I understand and I think I'm on board with. I'll kind of side with the supercomputers, but I think both of them have really good matchups. Both Tampa Bay and Denver are bottom 10 versus running backs in fantasy points allowed, adjusted for strength of schedule. The difference is Hall is at home and his team is favored by more than a touchdown, whereas you got Barkley as a small road favorite on the Eagles. The offense might be compromised depending on what goes on with their wide receivers by the end of the week. Right now, it looks like Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown are both going to sit. Hall has they're both definitely out. Okay. Yeah. So if that's going to.
Well, I guess not definitely, but Nick Sirianni is pointing towards Devontae Smith not playing. He has not been cleared. Unlikely.
I would say
they do have a week 5 bye too, so they might be a little bit cautious there on those wide receivers, knowing they have that week 5 bye and give them just a little bit more time.
Right. So, you could look at that in one of two ways. Either it's more Barkley, the whole offense runs completely through him now, or the entire offense kind of shrinks because they're throwing to guys like Jahan Dotson as the wide receiver one. Breece Hall's got the Braylon Allen thing, but Hall still has 20 plus total touches in every game. And on DraftKings, where we get full PPR, he's got at least 4 catches in every game. And then Brian Robinson, like we discussed, I mean, if Eckler is out, I think we have to tack at least 3 to 4 targets and 20 to 30 receiving yards onto his normal projection. And he's been pretty good even with Eckler in the lineup. He's 3x'd his current salary in 2 out of 3 games with Eckler. So going up with one and going down with one running back makes sense to me. But I'm curious to see if Devin is paying up for the same guys that I'm thinking of.
No, it's Saquon Barkley for me.
Okay.
I think he catches 8 to 10 passes this week without Devonta Smith. No team has allowed more receiving yards or receptions at the running back position than Tampa Bay. They're allowing 70 receiving yards per game. I mean, look, the difference here is I think Saquon is just a better running back than Breece Hall. Breece Hall is a runner, 54 yards, 62 yards, 54 yards, and maybe it's a little bit point chasing, but Saquon has hit over 100 in 2 of his 3 games, and I think he was 90 plus in his other game. We've seen him they both have big play potential, so I don't want to overreact to that, but Saquon with the 65-yard run last week. And I just feel like they are a team that, they paid Saquon all that money. They're on the road against Tampa Bay, and the way to beat them is right now, at least, is against the running back, which I never thought I would say that considering how good their run defense has been over the last several years. So I trust Saquon a little bit more. And I think his floor is a little bit higher than Hall. I completely understand the argument as far as that game, Philly could just not show up. but I don't know. To me, it's Barkley. I just feel better about it.
You think there's any way to squeeze them both in?
Not unless value opens up. I mean, right now, if I look at the wide receiver position, I mean, we'll talk about tight ends because maybe the answer is just to punt tight ends at this point of the season. Like, well, I guess Dallas Goedert is there and he's probably a lock for cash. But if you're not going Dallas Goedert, the only other options are like these cheap, low end guys. So unless you did that, I don't see a path because you're really going to be scraping at the bottom of the barrel at the wide receiver position.
So Vita Vea was able to log a limited practice today. He had been out for a couple of weeks, and Kalijah Cansey had been out as well. And I don't know that he's going to be back, but Vita Vea did get in a little bit. Now, Phil, Jets fans have assured me that I don't watch their games because I suggested that Braylon Allen is in a little bit of a work share there with Breece Hall, and they told me you clearly don't know what you're watching if you think Braylon Allen is in a work share with Breece Hall. Do you think that that's a consideration at all, or tiebreaker between these two?
I think that he did rotate in more last week as a normal, timeshare back. Did it stop Hall from touching the ball 20 times? No. Does it stop him from touching the ball 25 times like maybe Barkley will? Yes. And that's where my big reservation is that Barkley absolutely has the best role in fantasy football this year, and he's only $200 more. So I could have been swayed either way. My initial inclination was to put them both in the lineup. I don't love anything at the top end of wide receiver, which could make it possible depending on what happens during the balance of the week with injuries. But I think they're both great plays, and I'm not too nervous about Braylon Allen. I think Breece Hall is fine with him. Would he be better without him? Sure, but it's not holding him back.
Let's talk third running back. So a lot of people will play 3 in cash. This a week you're doing it. I mean, for me, it's probably Najee Harris. If I'm going that route, Indy's run defense, yes, they looked better last week. However, we have to caveat that because they played Chicago, and Chicago's rushing offense is likely the worst in the NFL. But in the 2 games prior, they allowed 159 yards to Joe Mixon and 151 yards to Josh Jacobs. So I mean, to me, it's like if I look at Harris and there's no Warren, I think it's a game where at the very least he can get 70 to 80 yards with potential to have that 100+ game against this Indianapolis defense. I just don't put any stock in, hey, we got things right versus Chicago because DeAndre Swift is averaging like 1.6 yards a carry.
Another name in that similar range that carries a maybe slightly different level of risk, but maybe more upside, Carson Steele at 5,500. And, Kareem Hunt was added to the 53-man rosters. Maybe that makes Carson Steele gone, but it kind of sounds like Justin Herbert is going to be out this week. And when I was pulling numbers for my article I write on Monday, the Chargers, their last 22 plays, they gained 15 total yards of offense on their last 22 plays. And they're going to have Derwin James out of the lineup. And at least they have Joey Bosa, I believe, is going to be out of the lineup. They're decimated. And this could be a situation where they don't have an offense able to sustain anything, especially against a good Chiefs defense. And you're seeing a lot of rushing and a lot of garbage time coming from that Chiefs offense.
Here's the issue, and sorry to jump all over you. 2 targets last week.
Yeah.
In a full PPR site, he caught 17 passes last year at UCLA. I just don't know in a PPR site how he's going to be involved, if at all, in the receiving game. And if he's not, it's a bit. I mean, it's sort of like the Jordan Mason argument from last week. It's like, Mason really isn't involved in the passing game. Didn't really pay off his price last week. In a lot of times that's just overlooked. So on FanDuel, I'm probably okay with it, depending on what his price is over there, given the
It's
half
5,800 on FanDuel. So
yeah, I think that's much more tolerable. PPR, man, it's just like 3 catches and now you need 30 extra yards to catch up. It's really difficult.
Yeah, he ran more routes than I thought that he would, but obviously wasn't targeted in the passing game. Now you got Kareem Hunt active. He would need 2 touchdowns, and you know,
Yeah, I mean,
definitely
even
not.
50 yards in a touchdown is 11 point. It's just like, it's hard. It's really difficult. But I hear you. And certainly I think on FanDuel, he's a much better play.
All right, let's move into our wide receivers. And I know you guys both mentioned you're not really seeing anything at the top of the board that's enticing you at wide receivers. I think there's a lot of good value in like the high 5,000 range. There's a handful of players that kind of stood out to me, but kind of Devin, where are you going here on your wide receivers for cash plays?
Is Chris Godwin just going to like score 17 touchdowns this year? What the hell is going on? I mean, the guy has 3 touchdowns in 3 weeks.
He's the new Cooper Kupp.
He hasn't had 3 touchdowns in like 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm so frustrated. Like, everything like I know just tells me like don't continue to not play this guy because there's going to be a regression. But like at some point you just have to do it, and that's the week he doesn't score. So I'm banning Cooper Kupp. I'm banning Godwin from my lineups, maybe for the rest of the year. We'll see.
That's aggressive.
I just know like the week that I played him a lot last year, and he scored, I think, 1 or 2 touchdowns all year. Although last year was a good year, so maybe I need to go back there. Deontay Johnson's like it's free square. I think it's just you put him in, you don't think twice about it. With Adam Thielen out, right?
Yes. I think he's going on IR, or he's definitely going to be out for a while.
Yeah. So certainly a guy that he can't really trust.
I think Devin might be having some trouble with his.
Might be Phil in the hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the hurricane hitting you, Phil. You okay there, buddy?
Phil is in Florida dealing with a hurricane, so hopefully he's okay. I'm sure he's going to chime back in here in any second.
And say it's both of us that we're just...
Yeah. Chris Olave is the other guy that I'm looking at this week. I think Olave, 6,500. We saw last week him finally get right. You know, he's a number 1 guy in that offense, and starting to play like it. The Rams confuse me because there's value all over the place, and I don't know, like, if I want to pay down for a potential opportunity, it would likely be a receiver on the Rams. And there's a couple contenders here. Tutu Atwell is probably the guy that you would want to pay down for. But is he just a big play type receiver? I don't know. But at 4,800, I think that big play opportunity, if you need to spend down, is certainly there. And then
I think he's fine, but he's not cheap enough. 40. I feel like Tutu Atwell should be 3,800 instead of 4,800.
Yeah, I mean, if you're operating in that ballpark and you're going to touch that, I'd rather go with Rome Odunze at 5,200. We saw him kind of break out last week, and he's going up against the Rams. I'd rather play against the Rams than to play a Ram, like we saw with Juwan Jennings last week.
Fair. And then what about Quentin Johnston? Is it more of a GPP play? I think it's
you can't touch it. You can't touch it if Herbert's out of the lineup. If it's a complete stay away. That offense is a complete stay away if Justin Herbert's out. It's just terrible. It is. I'm telling you, it's like worst offense in the league if Herbert's out of the lineup.
Fair.
I'll buy that. So
right, Phil, before this hurricane hits you, give us some plays.
Yeah, I am starting to deal with a little bit of hurricane action over here in Southwest Florida, but I did hear you say Deontay Johnson, right? So I think we're in agreement there that that's a lock button for cash games. 38% target share, 68% air yard share, 14 targets in his first week with Andy Dalton. And we did see Cincy get burned downfield all night on Monday Night Football. My second one is Rashee Rice, whose price is getting up there at 7,300, but I think he probably has the best floor ceiling combo of any receiver on this slate. And even though his price is going up, I'd say he should probably cost more like 76, 7,800. So there's still a little bit of value there in his salary. DraftKings has been a little bit slow to raise him, but with Travis Kelce failing to command targets, either because he's too old or too Hollywood at this point, we don't know what the answer is. Mahomes is really locked in on Rice. He's getting the ball out quickly. Rice is doing the yards after catch thing, and they look like a pretty unstoppable combo on those plays. I think there's a big question about what to do at wide receiver 3. So far I've paid up at running back 1, down at running back 2, and now I'm kind of middle of the road with Johnson, a little bit on the high end with Rice. There's 2 other guys that I really like in the mid tier. One of them is Brandon Ayuk, who I don't know if I could do again, and the other is Amari Cooper, who I'm scared to death to play in a cash game because
Don't you
of
just go
how
Juwan
volatile.
Jennings? 12 targets last week.
So Juwan Jennings is a fine player, but the Rams defense, as Jeff alluded to, this is something I was reading about. I'm going to shout out one of my favorite football guys' articles that goes out to subscribers on a weekly basis. That's Matt Waldman's Top 10, which is like a film-based analysis, 10 of his top takeaways from the week. And Matt is one of the best to do it. So when Matt is saying that the Rams pass defense is that bad, I'm going to take him at his word. Um, so I think Jennings might have been a little bit more of a product of that Rams defense. I mean, it's not like he ever did anything remotely like that before in his career when he filled in as a spot starter. Plus, Kittle might be back. We got to wait and see on that one. He practiced on a limited basis today. I mean, Ayuk still got 10 targets. I think he's the guy that the optimals are going to give you, but something's wrong with him, obviously. Might still be playing his way into shape. Something. So
Yeah, I mean,
I think
if the Rams defense is that bad and Brandon Ayuk can't, like, there's the counter argument there that, like, Rams defense is bad and Brandon Ayuk couldn't have a huge game. So I don't know.
that's what's making me
was-
lean Cooper.
He was kind of he was used outside of his normal role, so they had him closer to the line of scrimmage, and he was they were trying to kind of use him to pick up for Deebo Samuel and for Christian McCaffrey, and they had Juwan Jennings working a little bit more downfield. The Rams don't have real cornerbacks. They have Tre'Davious White, who, bless you, Tre'Davious White. I appreciate all of your contributions to the Buffalo Bills, but he's a shell of his former self. And they have a bunch of young safeties they are just trying to play outside. They're playing a lot of safeties instead of corners. They just have weird stuff going on. They have a new defensive coordinator, obviously, with Raheem Morris leaving, and there's a lot of trial and a lot of air going on in the Rams secondary. And so that's kind of what's happening there. And so that's why they were able to exploit downfield with the 49ers and Juwan Jennings over and over again, which would lean towards the Dunze. DJ Moore has been used almost in the dreaded JSN role from last year from Shane Waldron's offense. They just haven't been using him downfield outside of that one Hail Mary at the end of the half last week.
Yeah. Could I talk about Cooper real quick? Much to Devin's chagrin here. So for the second straight week, as I'm looking at our single lineup optimizer, Deshaun Watson is once again the best point per dollar quarterback on the slate based on our early projections. That tells me that once again, we want to have some Browns in our lineup. They were on the same page, Watson and Cooper, last week, 12 targets, 86 yards, and a pair of touchdowns. The Raiders are the team that made Andy Dalton the league's first 300-yard 3D passer. They're a top 5 matchup for wide receivers in terms of strength of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. It is a revenge game for Cooper if you're into that sort of thing. I think 6,200 is more than a fair price for Amari Cooper, and I think he is at least enough of a known quantity that I feel okay playing him in cash, knowing that he's got the upside to win the thing for me. I am definitely worried, though, that he doesn't have the floor.
You might want to refresh your optimizer there because he's not anywhere close. I don't know if there's been an update. or whatever it is. But yeah, there's no way. I mean, I just don't trust anything about this Browns offense at the moment. Their offensive line, they might be without their top 4 tackles, which is a big problem considering Max Crosby could have a big day. But yeah, I would go Ayuk in that 1v1 that you're mentioning there. I mean, Terry McLaurin is the other name at 5,800 that I don't think we've talked about. I would play McLaurin over both of those guys. It just seems like if you like Daniels, which I do, and if I can afford Daniels over Dalton, I'll certainly go that route. But if you like Daniels, you have to like McLaurin, and from what we saw on Monday. And so for me, it's McLaurin, Olave, and then Deontay Johnson.
Jamar Chase is discounted and played on Monday. 2 touchdowns, 110 yards. He did play the Commanders, but he's good at 7,700. Like that one kind of sticks out to me a little bit there as well. And then this is kind of more touching tight end, maybe, but I don't know that Trey McBride is going to play this week. And we saw Marvin Harrison Jr. get 11 targets, and he does get that Commander secondary. So that seems interesting to me, but that's 7,500. That might be pushing your limits and cash plays of what you
Got
can
my
get
GPP
in.
list.
Okay.
I think he's fine. It's just affordability. So if there's value that opens up throughout the week, I think that he's certainly a guy you can target. It's just like for me, if I have to choose between the floor of Barkley or the floor of Harrison, I think it's pretty. I'll go with the running back this week.
All right, and that's the natural segue. We can step into tight ends here, and I did lead off talking about Trey McBride being out potentially. If McBride's out, for me, Elijah Higgins at 3,100 is very, very, very in play. He is. They trust him. He's a converted wide receiver. He's in year 2 now. He's pretty comfortable now in that offense. They like him quite a bit. He ran almost exclusively when McBride left the game. They had been using him in 2 tight end sets with McBride. That's an offense that does use the tight end going up against a very weak Commanders defense. But we did mention Dallas Goedert potentially as a plug and go. Are you plugging Dallas Goedert in there at 5,100, or are you just kind of punting? What are you doing here at tight end?
I think I'm trying to find a way to get Dallas Goedert in my lineup. It's risky, right? So it's a little bit of point chasing, maybe a lot of bit of point chasing. But who else are they going to throw the ball to in Philly if Smith doesn't go? So like he's not that expensive, all things considering. Like he's 700 more than Cole Kmet, who never playing golf with that guy again. But anyway, I don't know. He's low 5Ks for the upside. I think he's a more than fine play. There's just a lot of he's the only guy that I would really pay up for because this week if you look at the top, it's Kelsey, who I'm not touching at all in cash. Brock Bowers, we saw him disappoint. George Kittle's dealing with injury. Kyle Pitts hasn't really been able to be consistent this year. So Goddard, again, entirely could be point chasing, but I think he just has a different role in this offense with more downfield throws. And if I can get Barkley and Goddard on a team that scores 21 points, I feel pretty good about that because that likely means I'm getting at least 1, maybe 2 touchdowns out of the 2 of them because they have nobody else.
I might petition DraftKings to remove tight end from the lineup requirements and replace it with kicker at this point because tight end is absolutely a deplorable fantasy football position this year. I want nothing to do with it. I think you ought to just punt and use it to get as many of the other plays that we've talked about at the other positions into your lineup. It's really injury watch. I mean, you've got the situation in Jacksonville with Evan Ingram, who didn't practice again today with his hamstring. Brenton Strange has received at least 5 targets and caught a touchdown and 3x'd his current salary in both starts so far in the place of Ingram, and the Jaguars ought to be chucking it as they try to keep pace with the Houston offense. So I think it's strange. Jeff mentioned Elijah Higgins at the same price point. I think he's probably higher ceiling, lower floor than Strange, to me anyway, if McBride is out, because I think he might be a little game script dependent. The Cardinals were chasing for most of the game, and they especially were late in the game when McBride went out. So I wonder if Tip Raymond, their other tight end, who they use more as a run blocker, might get on the field a little bit more than Higgins if McBride were to miss. So that's like my only uncertainty there. Otherwise, I would agree with you 100%. And then you have the George Kittle situation where if he doesn't play, you've got Eric. I don't even know how to say his name. Is it Saubert or Saubert? Does he get the French pronunciation?
I'm going to assume not.
Okay. Eric Saubert is 2,700. And with Kittle limited, and he was out last week. Saubert was in on 61 out of 71 Brock Purdy snaps. That's really all you're looking for at this position. Decent offense, snaps. He had 2 catches for 41 yards. If I play him at 2,700 and that's what he gives me, good enough.
I mean, if you want to punt Jordan Akins with the Browns' offensive line issues, 7 targets last week, I think they're going to continue to. It's a chicken and the egg situation in Cleveland because they can't block anybody, so they're not throwing downfield. But then defenses know that they're not throwing downfield, so they just blitz and have everybody up near the line of scrimmage because there's no downfield threat except the 1 or 2 shots that they're taking to Amari Cooper per game. So it's just a bad situation overall. And like Watson isn't great either, but it's not entirely all his fault.
Yeah, I think that for cash games, I don't really have anything else anywhere else to go there. But please take a moment to like and subscribe, and like Devin said, get to 200 likes, and we will be doing a jersey giveaway. Jersey, whatever team, whatever player you want. I might have to put a guess in there because I might want to get a Bills Mac Hollins jersey after the clip that our Drew Davenport shared of them dancing to the Killers during the game, the blowout game on Monday night. That was a lot of fun. And then also make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber to unlock all of the DFS content that we offer on the site. Devin does a fantastic job of leading that up. We've got every single slate, anything you could possibly want there for DFS content for less than $20 monthly or $95 annually. We can dive into our GPPs now, and we'll open up the board for GPPs. And where are we thinking on quarterbacks? Who's not been mentioned? Where are you going to target, Phil?
Jalen Hurts for me is a GPP play this week. I like him for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think with all of his pass catching weapons, Hurt and Barkley likely being very popular, I don't think too many people are going to click on Hurts, but I think that the chances of him having 0 overall touchdowns for a second straight week are very low. And the other reason that I really like him is because he's a high end fantasy quarterback that makes for a cheap stack because Goddard is only 5,100. And as we've been saying, we saw what he looks like as the primary target, or what he could look like as the primary target in that offense. And then if you wanted to double stack him, that's where it gets really value oriented because you've got the wide receivers are basically min price guys. You've got Johnny Wilson, who is an interesting size speed specimen. The guy's like 6'6", 230 with a 98th percentile speed score at 3,800. He maybe could assume the A.J. Brown role there. You've got Paris Campbell coming in at the min price. We know he's at least fast. Jahan Dotson stinks. Don't play him. I don't care how many targets he would theoretically get. He's not going anywhere near my lineups. But for all of those reasons, I like Hurts. And then we did mention the Rams defense and how terrible they are. And I think that puts Caleb Williams back in play. It really has nothing to do with his 23 DraftKings points last week because those came on 52 pass attempts, which he's in all likelihood not going to get this week. But we talked about that Rams D being that bad. And I think for that reason, maybe we see Chicago try some different things, take the reins off of Williams a little bit. and let him do some things. So I think that game could be a sneaky one to go above the 41-point total if Williams gets out to a good start and forces Matthew Stafford to do something other than put it in the chest to Kyron Williams. I kind of like that game as a sneaky tournament play.
I'm looking at Patrick Mahomes, and at 7,100, I understand that the Chiefs or the Chargers defense, or really the Chargers offense, may not force the Chiefs to throw the ball nearly as much as they need to. But you look at Mahomes' last 2 games against this Chargers team: 424 and 4 touchdowns last year, 329 and 3 touchdowns the time before that, and 410 and 3 touchdowns 2 games before that. So he just has these random in-division games, whether it's against the Raiders or the Chargers, where he just puts up huge numbers, and not a lot of people are going to be targeting him at 7,100. So right now he's going to be somewhere between 5 and 6%, and Kelsey is going to be – nobody wants to play Travis Kelsey. And it just depends on what you believe. If you believe that like Kelsey's just entirely washed, which, there's certainly that argument that he was partying too much in the offseason. But he started out slow before, and the last couple of years he started out slow. So 1 to 2% Travis Kelsey, like, I'm going to at least take a shot there, because there's at least an opportunity that he's not completely washed. You can run it back with Rashee Rice in that lineup, but certainly I think that it's in play. The other name that I'll throw out there, Gardner Minshew, especially if Myles Garrett doesn't play. We saw Malik Neighbors have a huge week last week against Martin Emerson. The Browns aren't rotating their corners, so Denzel Ward is staying on the same side of the field, which we know Devontae Adams will take advantage of just about any matchup he can get. And this could be a big game at home, a get-right game for the Raiders, who are having a surprisingly competitive season that I don't think a lot of people saw coming, even though they lost against the Panthers last week, but they do have that win against Baltimore. I think that's it. I mean, we talked about a lot of the big names in cash, so a lot of the Kylers and the Jaden Daniels, and I do like Andy Dalton again in GPPs, but I think we've mentioned most of the names.
I have 2 things to add on the Mahomes thing. Number one, I usually go into every week saying you have to play a little bit of Mahomes just because in tournaments, just because the ceiling is always there. I'm starting to wonder. I'm starting to lose faith. The guy is playing kind of like Sam Bradford. Like his air yards per attempt is very much near the bottom of the league. Everything is close to the line of scrimmage. He's really just kind of taking what the defenses are giving him right now, and he's happy to do it. I would love for it to happen because I like watching Patrick Mahomes score fantasy points. Same with Travis
Let me
Kelce.
counter with this, right? 2023, 226 yards, 305 against Jacksonville. Like, that's a pretty good game. 272 and then 203. And then like week 5, he turns it on. 281 and 2, 306, 424. He can pop these big games seemingly out of nowhere. They're very unpredictable. Matchups don't really matter for the Chiefs. They can have big games against bad offenses or defenses, or bad defenses, I should say. For me, it's entirely like, I still believe in Travis Kelce has 1 or 2 good games left in him. So I'm going to be taking a shot almost every single week. And if it doesn't hit, like, okay, I can live with that. But if you can get 1% Kelce Mahomes stack, maybe even less than that, because not everyone that plays Kelce is going to be stacking. A lot of people will be, but not everyone will. So I don't know. I don't love it, right? It's not like I'm going to be significantly overweight on Mahomes, but to your point,
Look, he's Patrick.
enough
He's
that I'm going to
Patrick
play.
Mahomes.
Right. What if Xavier Worthy catches an 80-yard touchdown? We know he has the speed and the capability to do it. So, like, there's guys that you could pair him up with. That's all.
2 Buckeye quarterbacks that are similarly priced that are playing against teams that entered the league in 1995 that have defenses that should be able to be lit up. Joe Burrow and CJ Stroud, I think, are both there where they are in must-have spots. And I think that those are two that I think are
Can't
very
wait till
interesting.
next year when we're talking about Joe Burrow and Quinn Ewers being former Ohio State quarterbacks that Jeff
Joe
is
Burrow
recommending.
graduated from Ohio. I'm sorry, Ellis. Joe Burrow graduated from the Ohio State University. He is an Ohio State graduate, so he definitely counts as a Buckeye. Let's hit our running backs now. And we went through, we talked to the high-end options in your cash lineups, and you can check that portion out. But are there other high-end options that are not Saquon Barkley and Breece Hall that you guys are looking at in your lineups this week? Or I know there's some injuries or maybe some defensive concerns with some of the other bigger names, but kind of where are you going on these running back slates right now, Phil?
Yeah, so we talked about the top, like you said. I think the most expensive running back that I'm looking at for tournaments outside of the big two that we named, I do like Kyron Williams a bit just because the workload resembles what it did last season. Going down the list here, Jordan Mason looks maybe okay for a bounce back. Don't really love
Too
the
expensive.
and he is getting more expensive even on DraftKings. But the guy that I actually had on my list was James Conner at 6,500. I think you might want to watch that he doesn't get steamed up here towards the end of the week. I was looking at projections that had him in the 10% range, but what I've been noticing in this day and age of Sims and uh, ownership projections and people using these tools more and more and more as they create these lineups, even more casual players, everybody kind of looks at the same types of projections and gets the same ideas. And then it almost has like the inverse effect where everybody flips their cards over and you're like, how the hell did James Conner get to 25%? Right? That shouldn't
He
have
won't
been.
be 20. He's trending
I
at
know,
like
I know he
5%.
won't, but we've seen it a couple of times this year with certain plays
You have a
where
lot
it's
of people using Sims that don't know how to use Sims. We'll just put it that way.
that is also very much fair. But I'm just saying that I've seen it happen with quite a few players, especially at
Yeah.
running back. And Connor strikes me as the kind of guy where this might happen, where we know Kyler Murray is going to get a lot of love from the crowd this week. We know people want to be on that game, and they might say the obvious thing is, well, yeah, Arizona could have a great game, but maybe it goes through Connor, who is going to be lower owned, and he was awesome before he ran into the brick wall that is the Detroit run defense last week. They're a known pass funnel and they shut everyone down. So I like Connor's profile as long as that ownership projection that I've been looking at is accurate. If he gets over 15%, if he starts creeping much higher than that, I don't think I love it. Um, Devin mentioned Najee Harris as a cash play. I was going to say the same thing, but um, for me, he's more of a tournament guy. Even though we're going to end up seeing like Cordarrelle Patterson break the slate most likely because of Arthur Smith and his chicanery. Um, Harris figures to be in a really good spot this week. And then the only other name I've got that I guess we could have talked about during cash too. It depends on what happens with both Joe Mixon and Damian Pierce. Again, if they both sit out, and it would have to be both of them, I think we have to look at Cam Akers, who's now at, was it 5,300, I think?
Yes, 5,300.
I think
Sure.
people are going to write him off because he didn't have a great game in the box score last week outside of the touchdown catch. But I think we saw what we wanted to see, and that was in the right game script. He is going to be the lead back. And if that's the case, I do expect Houston as a big favorite to be running quite a bit on Jacksonville. So I could see him. Um, I could see him as viable for cash and for tournaments. Maybe more so for tournaments because people don't want to play him now.
I mean, I don't know that he has the upside, but that would be the only counter argument there. I mean, look, we've named most of the names. The only other guy that I'll say is Aaron Jones going up against Green Bay at Green Bay. Again, you could build an entire revenge
Team.
lineup with Andy Dalton and Aaron Jones and some of these other guys, but
There's one player that has had this week circled for months in the NFL, and it is Aaron Jones.
Yeah. So, I mean, Green Bay's run defense hasn't been all that great either so far this year. So I think that he's in an okay spot. We saw Jonathan Taylor and Saquon both go for over 100. You know he's going to do everything he can to try and get there. He wants to do the Lambeau leap in a Vikings jersey.
You like I said, there's one player that has had this game circled for months, and it's Aaron Jones. Roshan Johnson, 4,100.
Sorry, I just threw up.
4,100 going up against the Rams. Just saying. All right, let's move to the wide receivers now. Devin, kind of who have we
Marvin Harrison Jr. is my favorite guy. I think 7,500. My only worry there is he might become too popular, but Washington's secondary has been absolutely abysmal for several years now. He's trending to be in that like 13 to 15% range. If he gets above 20, I'm probably going to question that. And he might, because right now most of the ownership projections still have Devonta Smith in. So, certainly that ownership will go to guys like Nico Collins, Jamar Chase, and Marvin Harrison. But I don't know. I do the passing and rushing matchups for football guys, and the last several years it's been the same thing. Just target guys against Washington. I think going back to Juwan Jennings, I talked a little bit about. I think he's in an okay spot. A lot of people are just assuming Brandon Ayuk is going to take over. I don't necessarily think that's true. Certainly Ayuk has upside, but as Jeff said, if he's in a different role, maybe not. And then I'll go way down the board. Let's have a little fun. If you want to pair Andy Dalton with someone other than Deontay Johnson, I think it's Jonathan Mingo, 3,300, and maybe he's the best value play of the week for me. But who's going to fill that Adam Thielen role? Because we saw Thielen catch that touchdown. Maybe it's just Chuba Hubbard, which we saw catch 5 passes last week. But Mingo is a former second-round guy. How much has he been held back because of Bryce Young and that offense? If you're looking to punt and you're looking to go with Barkley and Breece Hall, he's a way to do it.
So the guy who's going to fill the Adam Thielen role this week in that offense is Xavier Legette, the first guy on my list of GPP plays, because I think that obviously we know that Deontay Johnson, I would say, is probably going to be the highest owned player in cash and GPPs this week. Mingo, I think, is going to get more love because he's 3,300 and Legette is 48. Mingo, we could kind of go back to the same thing that we were talking about last week when I called out Zach Charbonnet, who, by the way, had a very good week 3. But when I called him out, we were quick to say that the guy is bad at football. Pretty sure Jonathan Mingo is bad at football as well.
He's had 2 games with a competent quarterback. That's the only thing that, like, Bryce Young is just atrocious.
Can't argue that. Bryce Young is, in fact, atrocious. But I think that Legette is going to be the lowest owned of the trio, and I think that's why I like him the best out of those options. Devin mentioned Chris Godwin during cash games. He didn't fit my build because he was a little bit too expensive, but I do think that he'll be a fine play. And I don't know if people really consider him in tournaments because they don't think he has a GPP ceiling and that he is like a cash game receiver. So I wonder about
you
his
mean he doesn't
percent
score
rosters.
touchdowns is what you're saying? Because
that could be it, that he still carries that kind of that kind of profile for people. But I mentioned Jalen Hurts as a favorite of mine for a GPP quarterback. So Godwin makes the most sense, I think, as the run back. Philly has allowed 44% more fantasy points to wide receivers than league average through 3 games. And a good amount of that damage has been done against them out of the slot. Jaden Reed, a primary slot guy, killed them in week 1. Darnell Mooney runs about a third of his routes from the slot. He burned the Eagles in week 2. And we know that's where Godwin operates. So I think this could be a spot that's a ceiling game for him. One where I'm probably biased is Andre Iosivas at 4,100. I'm biased for 2 reasons. Number one, we just watched him have a pretty good game in a high profile spot on national TV Monday night. But I'm also biased because he is by far my highest rostered player from over the summer doing hundreds of underdog best ball drafts. So I like the guy.
Really relevant, Phil. Thank you.
I know, but listen,
I got a lot of too.
Yeah, there's a unique I think I owe that to you, Jeff, because you were the first guy that I saw write about him this summer. And I said, oh, yeah, that guy's a touchdown maker. And guess what? He's a touchdown maker. He's got 7 touchdowns on 25 career catches, which, of course, he can't maintain. But I think it speaks to the fact that he's a favorite end zone target of Joe Burrow's. But there's an interesting dynamic now that T. Higgins is back, and that's that he has moved to the slot kind of more on a full-time basis. And that guy is a mismatch for nickel corners. He's big and he's fast, and they're going to have a problem with him. The return of Higgins might be offset by higher percentage targets, just better looks. So even if there's not as many to go around, he can make up with it with the quality. And we know that he's capable of scoring a touchdown on any given week. So if we like the Cincinnati passing game against Carolina, which I think that we do, I think that Yoshivas is kind of part of the fabric over there now, and he's someone that we have to consider every week, and he's still cheap.
Zach Taylor had a comment today, and somebody asked him about Yoshivas in a press conference, and he said, "Arrow keeps pointing up." So there you go. I think that it's they like him quite a bit. Everything's been positive. Jaden Reed for me.
Minutes talking about our third receiver on the Bengals.
Jaden Reed at 6,000, I think, is interesting. The Vikings have gotten better against wide receivers from where they were a couple years ago, one of the worst in the league in terms of allowing the most fantasy points against receiver. They love that zero blitz. They love to go all out. And if you've got Jordan Love back in the lineup, then that opens up opportunity, I think, for Jaden Reed to break a couple big plays against that. I'm looking at, Xavier Worthy, kind of the same thing, 5,700 there. We saw last 2 weeks have been a little bit disappointing after that big explosion week 1. Anything's in play with Patrick Mahomes any week. And then Phil's talking about touchdown makers on Phil's team. Alan Lazard at 4,300. And Alan Lazard is a touchdown maker. So there you go. But tight ends, anybody we haven't mentioned at tight end yet?
Play whoever you want.
Travis Kelce. Yeah, Travis Kelce was the only guy on my list for GPPs.
Okay. Then tight end.
Goddard, if he's under 15%, I think is the guy I would go with.
If you're going in with a complete punt at tight end, Eric All at 2,500. He's had 4 catches the last 2 weeks each. Get in the end zone against that 2,500. That's dirt cheap. That there's something there maybe. So just a complete punt. But let's go to our favorite stacks of the week. And Phil, what is your favorite stack of the week?
All right. So I already called out Hurts, Goddard, Godwin. That's a double God stack. You can't go wrong. I like Caleb Williams to Roma Dunze. I like Stroud double stacks. And just as you were saying it, Jeff, I think the point that you made on Jaden Reed is really important. And that's that Jordan Love. I'm giving the whole NFL again, aren't I? But listen, real quick. The point that you made on Jordan Love was a good one. It's kind of a one, what have you done for me lately type of game DFS. We haven't seen Love in a couple of weeks. He's got dangerous receivers. I think that becomes an interesting game with Love back, and I think it becomes an interesting stack as well. So sorry.
Gardner Minshew, Devontae Adams going up against Cleveland. This Cleveland team's on the verge of quitting. Losing to the Giants at home. Martin Emerson, like I mentioned earlier, Martin Emerson's one of the worst corners in football right now. And Devontae Adams should see a lot of him, just like Malik Neighbors did last week.
Justin Fields, 5,500. George Pickens, 5,700. And to get a little bit spicy, Calvin Austin at 3,300. Going up against the Colts defense that can very much be taken advantage of. I think that there is going to be an explosion game for Justin Fields here one of these weeks. I think that confidence is starting to soar. We saw that deep pass he completed to Austin late in last week's game. They're starting to the first couple of weeks he was only allowed to throw to the sidelines. Now he was able to allowed to throw it down the middle, and I think that you're about to see an explosion. So I'm going to go there. But what is Phil? What's your favorite discount play of the week?
I'm going to go way off the board and say Noah Brown at 3,800 for the Washington Commanders. He showed up late to the team after getting cut on cutdown day by the Texans, so he was being eased in those first couple weeks. But this past week, there was a shift. They gave him 33 snaps on 58 Jaden Daniels dropbacks last week, and that trailed only Terry McLaurin among Washington wide receivers. It only resulted in 3 catches for 29 yards, but the week before that, he had 3 for 56 on fewer snaps. So I think as he gets ingrained there, he could become a reliable wide receiver too for Daniels. So we like Daniels. We like the game environment. If his wide receiver 2 is sub 4K, I think we ought to like him a bit also.
I don't really have one. I mean, I could go way off the board, or I could. I mean, there's
way
just
off the board.
No, I'm not going to do it.
You're not going to give the people a discount play this week, Devin?
I gave him Britton Covey last week. I need to take this week off.
No, I think you gave him Dalton last week, didn't you? Or maybe that was at quarter.
I definitely gave him Dalton at quarterback for GPPs, but pretty sure I gave them Britton Covey.
He got hurt.
You know what? Fine. Let's go. It's not really a value play, but I'm going to go Jordan Whittington at 4,400. There's one of these Rams receivers is going to break out, and I like the profile of Whittington above Atwell and Demarcus Robinson. I don't love it.
I'm gonna double down here and say if Trey McBride's out of the lineup, I think Elijah Higgins at 3,100 is my favorite, just about my favorite play of the week. So I'll go with that one. Devin, why don't you tell the people what they need to know for their
week 4. If you're not checking out footballguys.com, our DFS subscription, now is the time where I think we start hitting the stride. So, I give out my personal cash game play on FanDuel every week. We have GPP articles for both FanDuel and DraftKings, cash game articles, rankings, ownership projections, basically anything you want, optimizers, etc. So check us out. Give this video a like because I'd love to give away a jersey to someone not in the UK. And comment how many DraftKings points Caleb Williams will have. But with that, good luck, everybody. We're going to do the outro because I want to. Good luck, everybody.